Hello, my name is Olurotimiosha. Today is July the 14th, 2026. In 3 days' time, Christopher Nolan's Greek epic, The Odyssey, will be released. And today I'm continuing with my narrative of The Odyssey. Of course, the epic, which is often called the greatest story ever told, was written by Homer, right? Homer was the blind poet, and I've done several videos just narrating the story in bits, right, in various scenes. Of course, the last one I did was when Zeus had ordered uh, Calypso, the goddess who'd held Odysseus captive on her island, uh, to release Odysseus so that he could return to his family in Ithaca, his wife Penelope and Telemachus. Now, so she helps him. She helps him build a raft, and she supplies him with wine and provisions and food, and so he's off. But remember, Poseidon was away in Africa. So in the Greek mythology, Greek civilization, Africa wasn't called Africa then until, of course, the Romans came. Then the etymology changed; it became Africa. But then it was called either Libya or land of the Ethiopians, right? Ethiopians, that's land of the people with burnt faces. So Poseidon was away in Ethiopia where he was being celebrated and there were sacrifices being made to him. But he returns, and as he returns, of course, Poseidon is Zeus's brother, and he's god of the seas. And so as he returns, um, he finds that Odysseus is on a raft on his way home to Ithaca, and of course he's still angry with Odysseus because Odysseus blinded his one-eyed Cyclops son Polyphemus, and so Poseidon decides to raise a tempest and destroy Odysseus's raft. So Odysseus's raft is destroyed. There's a huge storm, and Odysseus is drowning. He's drowning again. So he's back in his perils again, uh, despite Zeus's order that Odysseus should be let go and allowed to return home. So Odysseus is drowning. He's about to die, but he sights a beautiful woman, and he realizes she was a goddess. In fact, she was a goddess. Um, the goddess named Leucothea, right? Leucothea was a nymph, a sea goddess, right? And so she had compassion on him and decided to save him. So Leucothea was once a human herself. Her story is interesting, and I'll do a sidebar and just quickly, briefly talk about her story. But first of all, let me say what she did. So Leucothea, is shocked, and she's saying, "Hey, that why, why are the gods so angry with him that he's about to die?" But so she decides to help him. She tells him to strip off his clothes, right? He's in the water, he's drowning at sea, and she tells him to strip off his clothes, and she throws him her veil, right? Her veil is a divine veil. It's got magical powers, and she tells him to wrap the veil around his waist so he won't drown. And so he does as she instructs, and he strips, he throws off his clothes. He's naked, but he has her veil wrapped around her. And she tells him the veil would take him ashore, but once he gets ashore, he should throw the veil back to her. And he does this, and he's saved. He gets ashore, and he does as she instructed and throws the veil back to her. Now, as I said, I was going to quickly talk about the story of Leucothea. So Leucothea was once mortal, and her name was Ino. She was a queen, and Zeus would later deify her. So her story is interesting. Her sister had been um, and her sister was the mother of Dionysus, right? Dionysus, became the known as the god of winemaking. He's also known as Bacchus, right? Merrymaking wine, the libertine, and the god of fertility. So his mother was mortal, and his mother was Ino. I mean, his mother was the sister of Ino, right? Ino was a mortal, and when his mother died, uh, uh, Ino would take care of her. Now, interesting. Dionysus was the son of Zeus, but through Ino's sister, right? Ino's sister, and Zeus had that habit, right? Had the habit of looking out when he'd spy beautiful women and he'd mate with them, right? He'd mate with beautiful women, just like he did with the mother of Helen of Troy, who was her mother was, I think it was Leda, the queen of Sparta, and that's how Helen of Troy came in the form of an egg, and she hatched through an egg. She was a daughter of Zeus, right? A mortal daughter of Zeus. Now Dionysius was elevated; he became a god, but his mother was a mortal, and of course this uh, incurred the wrath of Hera. So the wife of Hera, the wife of Zeus, was an Olympian as well, right? And her name was Hera, and often she gets jealous uh, because of Zeus's infidelities and his philandering with humans, and so she was angry with Ino because Ino decides to raise Dionysus, you know, herself when her sister dies. Her sister, was the mother of Dionysus, right? And so when Ino raises Dionysus herself, Hera gets, she incurs Hera's wrath, and Hera decides to drive, cast a spell on Ino, and Ino becomes insane. So Ino becomes insane, and in her insanity, she one day boils her own son alive. Her son was Melisert, right? Melisert. So she boils him alive, and once she discovers what she's done, she takes her boiled son and both of them, and she commits suicide by jumping into the sea. Uh, however, Zeus, of course, has pity on her, and he decides to deify her, and he transforms her into a goddess. So that's how Ino, who had been mortal, who killed herself because she had been driven insane by Hera, that's Zeus's wife, out of jealousy. Uh, Ino then becomes Leucothea, right? She becomes a goddess, a sea goddess. So that's who ended up helping um, Odysseus, right? By throwing Odysseus her magic veil, which kept him from drowning. So Odysseus is washed ashore, but he's completely naked because he stripped off all his clothes and he threw back, he threw Leucothea's veil, as she instructed, back into the sea so she could have it. Now, Odysseus, completely naked, then sees there's some young women who are playing, with a beach ball. They're playing on an island. So he had landed on the island of Scheria, right? It was the kingdom of the Phaeacians, and so he sees these women playing, and he decides to call out to one of them, and they see him. The others run away, and then one of them, the most dignified, the most regal amongst them, she was beautiful, and then he kneels down before her. He covers himself with fig leaves, right? So you see, it's almost channeling the Genesis, right? So he covers himself with fig leaves. Ironic, since he's a king, right? But he's kneeling down, and he doesn't know if she's a goddess. So he says, that she looks very beautiful, and that if she's, that he thinks she's a goddess. If she's a goddess, she's, Artemis, because of her beauty. If she's not a goddess, then, he says that, look, her parents must be very blessed because of how beautiful she is, And so she tells him who she is, and she tells him that she's a daughter of the king uh, of the Phaeacians, right? And King Alcinous. And she decides to get her maidservants to get him clothing so he could clean up. And so he cleans up, and so she says, okay, he should come with her to the palace, right? But he would have to go alone because in the custom of the times, it wasn't appropriate for a man, for women, young women who were not married, to be seen, in the company of men, right, walking in the streets in public. So he had to come alone. So he was well dressed, and by the way, after he was dressed, the name of the woman, the daughter of King Alcinous, right, the king of the Phaeacians, was Nausicaa, right? Nausicaa, or pronounced Nausicaa, or Nausicaa, or Nausicaa. Um, so she took a liking to him, which is kind of, interesting, since Odysseus was now a middle-aged man, probably almost 50, right? He was a middle-aged man because he'd been gone for 20 years, right? 10 years in the Trojan War, and then 10 years just wandering, being held captive, and he was held captive by Calypso, 7 years on her island. And so 20 years, he was a middle-aged man, but she was a very young lady, but she found him very attractive, and she thought she wanted to marry him. She wanted him to be her husband. So she was hoping that her father would be able to arrange a marriage between both of them. So he walks into, the palace of King Alcinous, and he goes and wraps himself around the knees of the queen, right? That's the mother of Nausicaa, imploring her to provide him, grace, and just to help him. Now, in the custom of the Greeks back then, it was uh, they had a duty under the instruction, the commandment of Zeus himself. They had a duty to extend hospitality to travelers and strangers, and so they gave him they were hospitable, and they welcomed him in the palace. They held a feast, a banquet for him, and all of that. And so he was relaxed. And in fact, yes, the king was then thinking that maybe he could arrange a marriage between Odysseus and his daughter, since she was unmarried. But so one day, while they held a feast for him, they had a banquet for him. To honor him, they invited a blind poet called Demodocus, right? Demodocus, he was uh, a blind poet, and he was playing a lyre. So that was in the custom of the time. And while playing the lyre, he started to tell a poem, right? So you see, that was the manner of the Greeks back then. He was reciting a poem, and he was talking of the Trojan War, and he was talking about Achilles and the great Odysseus, how they had gone with the Achaeans. By the way, the Greeks were called Achaeans, right? Achaeans at the time, or Danians, right? That was the name, collective name of the Greeks, right? So how they'd gone off to the Trojan War, and how Odysseus had been so clever, and he had thought up the strategy of using a large, gigantic wooden horse to hide the soldiers, so they could steal through the impregnable walls of Troy. And so, as he was reciting, as the blind uh, poet, playing on his lyre, right? A lyre is a stringed musical instrument, and he's reciting the poem of the Greek heroes. Odysseus starts to cry, and everybody notices that this is very personal to him. So he's weeping like a child, and so they ask him why he's crying, and then he reveals to them that he is Odysseus, right, and known for his cunning, Odysseus of the nimble wit. So this is very significant. Now, this area, right, of the story, this part of the story is very significant, because remember, the Odyssey was written by Homer. Homer was a blind poet, right? He was a blind poet, and this guy Demodocus was obviously Homer was channeling himself into the play, right? So he has a blind poet. Homer is a blind poet, and he's reciting the story of the Greek tragedy of Troy, right? The Greek heroes, which is what Homer is known for, right? Homer told the story of the Iliad, right? How the Greeks had gone off to war uh, with the Trojans, right? And here he is, he's talking about the story of Odysseus, and that's what Homer does in the Odyssey. So Homer is actually channeling himself, like I said, into his own poem. So they do find out that um, Odysseus is actually a king. He's the king of Ithaca, and he's the Greek hero of the poem that all the Greeks had heard of because they were famous. These people were famous. The stories were famous all over the Greek, the lands of the Greeks, and nobody knew what had happened to them. And so Odysseus told them his story and told them what had happened after the Trojan War and how he'd been wandering for 10 years because nobody knew where Odysseus was, right? Nobody knew what was happening to Odysseus. But of course, Poseidon had cursed him and had him wandering the seas. And of course, he was trapped by one goddess after the other, or sorceress after the other. So eventually, though, Odysseus didn't accept the unspoken offer of marriage to the daughter of King Alcinous, since of course he had his wife Penelope back home in Ithaca, but King Alcinous helped him, and they stocked him. They replenished him. The Phaeacians were known as the greatest seafaring people, right? They were masters of the sea, and so they stocked him up with everything he needed, and they took him back to Ithaca. Now he was asleep, right? He was soundly asleep. So they stocked him with a lot of wealth, a lot of provisions, great wealth. And so they actually, when they docked at the shores of Ithaca, they took away, they offloaded everything that the great gifts that the king of the Phaeacians had given him, and he didn't even know when they docked and when they'd taken him off and you know disembarked all his luggage and everything, his gifts. Because he was sound asleep, and they had gone off, right? But that's another story. The final scene was how he confronts his wife's suitors, right, who had eaten him out of house and home, right, out of home and house, or it's one of the two. Um, I like that phrase, right? I like that phrase. But the Odyssey is a very great story, and the final scene, the final act, was a bloodbath in his home. I'm not going to describe that. It was very, very gory. It's a very gory bloodbath, and it's amazing that Homer held no punches. Because he described the gory details of the massacre, unleashed by Odysseus on his wife's suitors. In any event, I'll stop here, and hopefully you can go out and watch the movie The Odyssey, and hopefully it's as interesting and satisfying as the great epic, the book itself, written by Homer. My name is Olorotimi Osha, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.